Hello everybody, Jeremy here. First and foremost, happy International Women's Day. Wonderful occasion, and I thought it being International Women's Day, it would be a great occasion to celebrate one of my favourite female authors. I read Patricia Highsmith for the first time. I think it's nearly going back 5 or 6 years ago now. I read this, her most famous novel, The Talented Mr. Ripley. It's a very, very powerful book. Very briefly, if you're not familiar with it, the protagonist, Tom Ripley, he's sort of a downbeat New York lowlife who's involved in an invite scam. So that's the opening chapter of the book. He then encounters quite randomly a certain Richard Greenleaf, who happens to be a very wealthy industrialist. And Richard has a problem. His son, Dickie Greenleaf, is living in Italy, living off an inheritance. And Richard wants Dickie to come home. He's worried about him. Tom Ripley, the main protagonist, persuades Richard that he really is an old school buddy of Dickie's, and he would be the perfect man to go over to Italy and persuade Dickie to come home. Complete and utter fabrication. So that's one of the striking novel is the character of Tom Ripley himself. He's quite an extraordinary creation. Why? Well, you'll find often if you pick up a detective novel or a crime novel or anything roughly within the thriller genre, you'll often find, the bad guys, the serial killers or the gangsters. They can often be, larger than life characters. They can often be grotesque, dark, perverse. But more often than not, they feel like they have been created. There is something burlesque and exaggerated about them. They feel like they've come out of the author's mind. They don't feel quite real. They might be frightening, the book may be gripping, but they don't always feel very real. They feel created. Now, in my view, one of the great virtues of The Talented Mr. Ripley is all those things. He is grotesque, he is dark, he's perverse. He's an extraordinary creation, but he doesn't feel creative. He feels real. When you read the book, you feel that this character could be a real life character. He could be a guy you'd meet on the bus or meet on the train or pass on the street. He has plausibility about him, which you don't often find in books of that kind. And I think that is very, very powerful. Just to elaborate very briefly on that, I would read crime fiction. If you read a lot of it, if you read, detective novels, crime fiction, thrillers, they often have an underlying structure, a dynamic. You'll have a bad guy, it could be a serial killer or a gangster, and they are bad. They have an innate badness. They have bad impulses, bad instincts. There's just something rotten about them. And the premise really locates them within the world of the book. But the world of the book is just. It's good. So the dynamic you have is you have a bad character with bad impulses that finds himself in a world that is basically just. Now that dynamic is remarkably consistent throughout that genre, and there's no doubt there are some very subtle versions of it and some very thoughtful and subtle creations, and there's also melodramatic, exaggerated versions of it. Don't get me wrong. Striking to me about Highsmith as a novelist and in her that dynamic does not exist. There is no doubt that Tom Ripley is a bad guy. He is a perverse guy. He's a dark guy. He's not an ordinary character. He is an extraordinary character. He is an extraordinary gift. His gift his main gift, one of his many gifts, is he's a confidence trickster. He can pretend to be another person, and he can do it quite remarkably. So he's an extraordinary character. He is also an extraordinarily bad character. But the world he inhabits, the world Highsmith creates in the talented Mr. Ripley, is not a just world. In fact, the world she creates is just as bad, twisted and dark as Tom Ripley. And I think that is extraordinary. If you would like me to read your book and give you my thoughts, observations and feedback, again, I will link information to my website and to my LinkedIn profile at the bottom. Finally, penultimate, second last point, very quickly, if you are watching on YouTube, I'd appreciate if you could subscribe. There'll be more videos like this, my thoughts and observations on literature, on philosophy, on politics. So if you like this video and you'd like to see more, please subscribe. And finally, and most importantly, happy International Women's Day. If you're watching and you are a woman and you're writing, please continue to write, because women are extraordinary writers, and Patricia Highsmith is an extraordinary writer, and she has given me great pleasure over the years reading her.